to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
Welcome to Vecinos this morning. My guest is Barbara Zaragoza, and she will be talking about her life as a writer and writing books. Barbara, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. How did you ever get started in writing? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, the books that I'm going to talk about today, my book, San Ysidro and the Tijuana River Valley, is, of course, about the border region. I'm very interested in the South Bay. And so people wonder, and I'm especially interested in the Latino or the Mexican-American history of the South Bay. And so most people assume that I am local here and that, in addition, I am Mexican-American, and I'm actually neither. I grew up in San Carlos, which is a small suburb of San Francisco. And my parents were immigrants, but they're Polish and German. And so it just so happened that as a young mother, I ended up moving down to Otay Mesa, and my children went to the San Ysidro School District. That was in 2001. And from 2001 to 2007, I lived in this San Ysidro district looking at the border and raising 3 small children. And it was just a wonderful place to be. Our neighbors, we knew our neighbors. We had block parties. I was a volunteer mom. This community really, really nurtured me. Everybody looked out for each other, and I just loved the internationalism of it. Because after living in the Bay Area, my undergraduate, I went off to Washington, D.C., and I got my bachelor's from the American University in International Studies. And so this idea that I could see the border every day was wonderful. And then my husband was in the Navy, and we got stationed in Naples, Italy. And that was at the end of 2007. And everybody was like, oh, you're going to go to Italy. And we had these wonderful visions of what Italy was going to be like, drinking wine, eating cheese all day, being able to look at the David, all these artwork. Well, we got to Naples, Italy, to the base. And there was no trash collection for several weeks. And when you drove down the autostrada, their freeway, there was trash 5 to 10 feet on either side of the autostrada for miles and miles and miles. And you would drive and you would see a Fiat in front of you actually throw trash out of their window as they were driving 100 miles per hour. Naples, Italy, there were prostitutes on every corner doing a lot of business. There was guns out in the open, in spite of the fact that Italy has banned guns. There was mafia, there was crime, there was pickpockets. And they put us Navy people on a base that was over a toxic waste dump. And so in this atmosphere, it turns out that Naples was one of the most dangerous cities in all of the Western world. And people were getting depressed. The service members were depressed. They weren't going anywhere. They were sitting in their homes. How can we be here? This is not the Italian experience. Well, to boot, when I would meet the Italians, the Neapolitans, they'd say, oh, where are you from? I'd say San Diego. And they would say, what are you doing here? They had no pride in where they were. And so I said, how can I use my talents, my gifts, my interests to help the situation in a small way, to be a contribution? And I said, I know a travel guide. I'm going to write a travel guide. And this was during the time that social media was just starting. Facebook had just started up and blogs had just started up. So I started a blog. Plus, they had a community newspaper on base called The Panorama, and they had a larger newspaper called The Stars and Stripes. So I'd take the kids in the car on the weekends with my little Prius, and I would drive around Naples looking for places amidst the trash, and found that Naples is also the oldest city in the Western world. And they have some of the most amazing archaeological sites. I would take my kids to the oldest ancient Greek ruins called Kuma, and they would be able to go and run around the Sibyl's cave where she used to utter her oracles. And I was able to go to the Phlegrean fields and find these almost abandoned archaeological ruins that are falling apart because they don't have the money to take care of it, that were the ancient Roman baths. And I called Carlos Santillo and I showed my children the opening of Hades. Carlos insists that you can go there. And all of a sudden, I was blogging and writing about the sites of Naples. And people in this small community on the Navy base were saying, thank you so much. I'm so glad to see this. I'm so much happier because I know where to go. I don't have to just stay home. And the Italians on base started telling their friends, look at what this woman is doing in English. Look at how she's writing about our environment. And what I noticed is, as they started to gain pride in their history, because travel is really writing about history, they wanted to take care of their environment a lot more. We wanted to take care of our environment a lot more. We wanted to pick up the trash, literally, but also figuratively. So after those 3 years were up, we came back and we moved to Chula Vista. My husband got out of the Navy. It was beginning 2011. It was December 2010. And we still lived by the border, but now Chula Vista, which is one of the safest cities in all of the nation. And things got really quiet, and I got depressed because I had lost my purpose. For 3 years, I'd struggled. We need more pride. We need to take care of these ruins. We need to clean up this city. I was reading the Italian papers by then, I was very involved, and I'd really lost my purpose. What am I going to do now? What can I do here? And I started to go back to San Ysidro because I missed it, and also because Italian and Spanish are so similar, and I'd learned Spanish as a high schooler. And so I would go back to San Ysidro and see the border and go down to Mexico because that was the lifestyle that harkened back to Italy. And that's when I realized, boy, there are a lot of stereotypes about the South Bay. There's a lot of stereotypes about National City and Chula Vista and Imperial Beach and in San Ysidro. And it's considered an underserved community. So why don't I write about San Ysidro? And so I ended up contracting with Arcadia Publishing, and I ended up saying, I'd like to write about San Ysidro. And they said, go for it. You need 200 pictures, you have the captions, write the history. You have 9 months to do it. And so what's fascinating is that San Ysidro had not one book about it. The South Bay had not one book. The Tijuana River Valley had not one book about it. So I had to start from scratch. If you think about it, think about Civil War. I mean, you have just hundreds and hundreds of books, tons of primary sources. But I really had nothing. So I had to go to the San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce. And they said, well, go find this person and go find this person. Then I went to Casa Familiar. Oh, well, go find this person and go find this person. Then I went to Los Amigos. And I met some of the most dynamic people who were giving me their photographs. And I also met a wonderful librarian called Adolfo Campo, who's at the San Ysidro Public Library. And it turns out he and these wonderful librarians in San Ysidro have kept as much of the San Ysidro history as they could find in these binders that are underneath the counter of the library. And some of the things in there, I mean, it's kind of scattered. They have a Bay Cities Press, like a little Xerox copy, but Bay Cities Press doesn't exist. It's lost to time. You can't find it anywhere. You go to newspapers.com, you can't find it anywhere. So I was really starting from the bottom and had to reconstruct this history. And that was a difficult thing to do. And I started, put a pin in this, with William Smythe. And San Ysidro had a very, very dynamic, exciting history. But what I ended up telling in this very first book was a very white history, because that was what was available. And of course, I love the book for the things like the fact that Rita Hayworth lived in Chula Vista. You can still see the casita, and then made it big in Tijuana. Seabiscuit was boarded in the Tijuana River Valley for a time so that he could compete in Agua Caliente. Cesar Chavez came to the Civic Center, to San Ysidro, and to National City. Bobby Kennedy, 2 days before his assassination, came to San Ysidro and to National City because those areas were considered an important voting bloc. So all of this famous history. Well, my other part was this amazing little history that starts with basically William Smythe. In 1909, he's a Northeasterner who wanted to create a utopian agricultural community. And this utopian agricultural community he felt was very important because it was during the time of industrialization. And he wanted to make sure that every man could live off of 1 acre of land and do well for themselves. And so he came to San Diego, and he was actually going to create a chain of little landers. And so he went to try to buy property downtown San Diego, but it was too expensive. So it was cheaper at the border.
We're going to let you talk more about this as soon as our commercial is over. Thank you for sharing this much with us. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Great.
A podcast or radio show on WS Radio is a great way to create content marketing. Turn prospects into customers into raving fans. Contact Wade at WSRadio.com or call 866-WS-RADIO.
The richness of your life is reflected in the shimmering elegance found at Diolune Design. One-of-a-kind jewelry and pieces from Cynthia Dillon in silver and gold help to express your unique personality. The flowing designs of her creations will empower the way you move throughout your day. Join us online at DIOLUNdesigns.com.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, CEO and founder of VinVillage.com and the Wine and Dine Show on Vin Village Radio. Do you have a wine, event, product, or service to promote? Then contact VinVillage.com to reach thousands of wine lovers across the country. VinVillage connects like-minded wine enthusiasts with unique and exclusive wines, events, products, and services. To learn more, contact us on VinVillage.com. VinVillage is where wine lovers connect.
One person has the power to change the world, impact millions of lives, and leave a legacy for lifetimes to come. That person is you. In the New York Times bestseller, What is Your What? Steve Olsher, award-winning author and founder of the Reinvention Workshop, reveals his proven process that has helped thousands of men and women discover, share, and monetize the one thing they were born to do. Grab your free copy now at www.whatisyourwhat.com/free. That's www.whatisyourwhat.com/free.
Take a break from politics. Tune in and learn something. WS Radio shows are worth your time and are filled with tips and advice. Add us to your lunch routine and we'll give you a meal for your mind.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of America's economy. Every Thursday, SBA Radio interviews industry professionals and is dedicated to provide small businesses with timely insights and innovations. Visit www.sbaradio.us for details.
Has your business been appified? Are you tired of doing marketing that doesn't deliver results? Mobile apps build loyalty and quality retention. Your app from UPG Mobile puts your business on their mind and at their fingertips. UPG Mobile will give you a custom app highlighting how you are unique, targeting your message, and improving your open rates. Amplify your business and amplify your presence with your customers at upgmobilemarketinggroup.com.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
When we went to commercial, we were talking to Barbara Zaragoza about working in San Isidro, or what she has found in San Isidro, and about a family called Smythe. Many people that are not familiar with San Isidro did not understand the uniqueness of that community. So I'm hoping Barbara will lead us down the road through this community.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Thank you for having me. I can't stop talking about South Bay history. As you know, I think it's the most dynamic community in the nation, and I'm wondering why more people aren't studying it and talking about it. But anyway, so I was going to talk about my book, San Isidro in the Tijuana River Valley, and where I started with William Smythe, who was a writer, a journalist from the Northeast, who came to San Diego and set up a utopian agricultural community. And he felt that every man could live off of 1 acre of land. And he put into the city assessor's office a town called San Isidro, which is named after the patron saint of farmers. And then he started to sell off his lots of land to people. And in actual fact, it was a disaster. And the historians didn't want to admit it. But the agricultural utopian community was a disaster. First of all, the people that moved in were educators, they were writers, they were not farmers. And there was no irrigation. And what is interesting that we find also that wasn't necessarily talked about is that in their bylaws, they put that they would have no Asians, African Americans, or Mexican Americans who are allowed to live in that community. So that was the beginning of the racial restrictive covenants, and I actually have a scan of the deed that was created during that time. And so in 1916, you had the San Diego Great Flood, and it washed little landers out, and everybody basically left. And that began the era in San Isidro of the border barons. Because who came in during that time was these border barons who had owned saloons and opium dens and brothels in Bakersfield and Mexicali. And because of the U.S. prohibition that started then in the 1920s, they realized that they could build these great big resorts in Vice City or Tijuana, and they could live in San Isidro and wash their money. Launder their money in San Isidro. And the big guy that I write about in this book is Frank Bayer, who was purportedly known to drink a bottle of whiskey a day. And he gave the money for the San Isidro Public Library, but there had to be a men's smoking room with racy magazines, or today's kind of penthouse. And then, ironically, he also gave money for 2 churches, a congregational church in Mount Carmelo, which still exists there. And he was a colorful character. But what he and many others did was go down to Tijuana, create racetracks, saloons, opium dens, and he ended up hiring in upper management all of these white people. And it was reported that shacks were all around for the Mexican people who came to work in these low-income jobs. And that's actually when the sewer issue began, because Tijuana sits 300 feet above sea level, and the border barons were creating these brothels and saloons and racetracks and this beautiful Agua Caliente where all of these great celebrities were coming, and they weren't creating the infrastructure along with it. And so what you had was a whole bunch of sewage coming down into the Tijuana River Valley, and all of the people who were boarding Seabiscuit and all of the farmers complaining that there was no sewage. And so anyway, I wrote this book and published the book and kind of waited now. How's it going to be received? Because a real historian wants critique and criticism. You know, this was kind of, history is kind of like layering the cake. This is the first book. What am I going to do next? And I got on Amazon.com a critique. She gave me a 4-star, but she said, this book is very interesting, but so lacking in Latino history. And because of social media and the accessibility, she'd put her name on, and I searched her on Facebook and then sent her a message saying, hi, I'm the author. Thank you so much for your message, for your honesty, for your authenticity. How do I get a hold of more Latinos? How do I find them? Because the fact is that in these underserved communities like San Ysidro, everybody knows everyone, and they also distrust people coming into the community for good reason. And so here comes this middle-aged white woman who's not part of the community, and I had to spend a lot of time gaining trust. People had to trust. And when you talk about your family history, that's a precious thing. You're putting that into somebody's care, which is very important. And so she was very, very exuberant and said, well, come meet my family. Come. I'm actually in Florida, but I have this big family and I have a very big history in San Ysidro. And she introduced me to her sisters and to her cousins, and we're friends now. And she's just wonderful. And one thing led to another, and I said, I need to write a book. I need to do a project about the Latinos in the South Bay because that history has not been written. And I'm not quite sure why, because the South Bay has 450,000 people population, and at least in the 2010 census, at least 51% of people who check the box Hispanic. And it's probably a lot more by now. And why that history hasn't been told is strange. And so I embarked upon what will now be a museum exhibit at the Chula Vista Public Library that opens on Saturday, January 27th at 2 p.m. It's going to be 100 photos that's free and open to the public for anyone to see. There is then an iPad with interviews and a website, the Chula Vista Heritage Museum. And I ended up interviewing about 70 people. I transcribed about 50. I asked for archival photographs, and I collected over 2,000 archival photographs. And then said, well, I need an accompanying history book that talks about the context of all of this, not just a local history of this is just the South Bay and this is what this person did, this person. But when you have someone who, for example, fought in the Mexican Revolution, I have to explain who Pancho Villa is, who the Mexican Revolution is, and when they came over to San Ysidro, why that was such an important part of their history. And so that's coming out. But what I found was that one person led to another person, led to another person, and everybody had friends who wanted to talk about their history, who wanted to donate their time, tell me about their family. And what I found was something, Maria, extraordinary. I love this region even more. Particularly in Chula Vista and San Ysidro, what we have today are residents whose ancestors go back 8 generations to the Portola expeditions in 1769.
That's amazing. Talk a little bit about that era, just a little bit.
Yes. The era is interesting because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that Portola came to Baja California specifically to kick out the Jesuits who had created missions in all up and down Baja. Well, the missionaries also had soldados de cuera, the leather jackets. They had a lot of soldiers who were frontiersmen who had been there 2 or 3 generations. And as I write in the book, what we do talk about is that these Jesuits came to Baja, that Father Serra came to Alta California, and of course they enslaved the Native Americans. They had bad relations with the Native Americans. Disease killed a large number of Native Americans. For people in the South Bay, though, what's important is the Native Americans who survived and intermarried with those pioneers. And so what you had in Baja California is as they started to come up to Alta California and the expedition in 1769, they were all of very mixed identities. They were mestizo. There was Africans who came during the slave trade and to Mexico, and then African Spaniards came to Baja California hoping to have more freedom. A lot of these residents in the South Bay of Spanish-speaking descent are taking their DNA and finding that they have Jewish heritage, that they're Sephardic and Ashkenazi as well. So they come into Alta California in the 1700s under the Spanish crown, and every once in a while also intermarry with the Native Americans here in San Diego. And this is their ancestry. This is their background, is that they are the true first people in the South Bay, and they're still living here. And some of them have one foot on both sides. And so that was a really, really first amazing discovery. And so there's two, I think, families that are most interesting to the history. The first is the Gonzalez family and Claudio Gonzalez, because he dates his family back to the Portola expeditions when they came up. And then at some point, at an unknown time, they went back to Baja California and they owned large tracts of land. And then when the Mexican Revolution came, they ended up selling all of that land and coming back to the South Bay. And Claudio Gonzalez first worked at the salt works, but then owned about 50 acres of land in the Otay Valley, which is today Chula Vista. And he had 120 workers and was a very, very successful farmer. So oftentimes we think of the Mexican Revolution as having been Mexican Americans coming in during that time, but it's not true.
We will continue the story in a few minutes. It's very interesting for all of us to learn.
Tired of presentations with no impact, no inspiration, and no traction? Do dull speakers have you and your team disengaged and distracted by smartphones? Christopher McCullough brings energy, insights, and 2 decades of experience, delivered with punch, humor, and heart. Your team will leave energized, uplifted, and with a sense of purpose. Visit ChristopherMcCullough.com to bring some heat to your next speaking engagement. McCulloughe. ChristopherMcCullough.com.
Take a break from politics. Tune in and learn something. WS Radio shows are worth your time and are filled with tips and advice. Add us to your lunch routine, and we'll give you a meal for your mind.
I raised $8,000 to build schools for South African children. After realizing how many people go hungry in San Diego, I now volunteer at a food pantry.
I'm spending the next year doing volunteer projects across 3 countries and helping in ways they designate to be the most helpful.
The World Link program at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice recognizes the potential of youth as agents of social change. Learn how you can help youth become a generation of leaders in action at peace.sandiego.edu.
Attention business owners, if you feel like your business owns you and want to grow your company and get your life back, then get the Scale Toolkit at scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com. Created by Wall Street Journal bestselling author David Finkel and Priceline.com co-founder Jeff Hoffman, this free collection of 36 videos and PDF tools will help you build a business, not a job. Go to scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com today and learn how to work less by getting your business to produce more.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of America's economy. Every Thursday, SBA Radio interviews industry professionals and is dedicated to provide small businesses with timely insights and innovations. Visit www.sbaradio.us for details.
If you heard that sound, you probably are eligible for insurance from Navy Mutual, insuring the men and women of the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. Here's what one policyholder, retired Navy Commander Thomas Dade, had to say.
Navy Mutual is the best insurance decision I ever made. I wish you had a savings plan available that earned the rates my Navy Mutual insurance has been earning.
Navy Mutual Aid Association, started by military members in 1879, serves active, reserve, and retired military today. Navy Mutual honors our military by providing them affordable life insurance with the features they need without fine print, sales fees, or military service restrictions. Value, integrity, trust, and stability are the cornerstones on which our commitment to you and your loved ones are built. Call Navy Mutual at 1-800-628-6011 or NavyMutual.org for your personal life insurance plan consultation. 1-800-628-6011 or NavyMutual.org. Navy Mutual, insuring those who serve.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
Welcome back to Vecinos. My guest today is Barbara Zaragoza, who has a new book coming out in the spring. But for today, we're going to talk about a couple of the people that are in the book and how they made history, a history that has not been discussed before, either because it was forgotten or it wasn't considered important. But Barbara is certainly looking at these people and giving them the value and the importance of what they did in our community. Barbara?
Well, thank you, Maria. You know, it's interesting you say that about why the history of the Latinos in the South Bay have not been told, even though they're essentially a majority in the South Bay. What I've found is that underserved communities don't have their history told. And a part of it is money, you know, and a part of it is that people who have money, they're the ones that hire people to tell the stories. And they're the ones that hire people to tell the stories about them, right? So people who own companies will say, well, I'd like to hire you to tell the story about me. Yeah. And so I think that was certainly part of it. Someone asked me, do you think that racism played a part? Well, you know, the South Bay Historical Society and the Chula Vista Heritage Museum are 501c3s. We are nonpartisan. We are non-political. So I have to speak the truth and the facts and the history. And yes, that is the reason. The reason why the history has not been told is, it seems, because of a lot of racism. And the reason why I started the history of the San Ysidro and the Tijuana River Valley essentially in the late 1800s was because during that time there was an Anglicization of the area of California, and whites wanted to take over and only told their history. And so in the South Bay, in the 1880s, a lot of Yankees came to the South Bay. A lot of white people from all sorts of, from Europe and from the rest of the United States. They set up with the city assessor's office, and then their historians said, this was when the history started, not realizing that there had been people on that land for hundreds and thousands of years beforehand. In particular, right before then, the people who owned most of the South Bay was the Arguello family. And I was able to interview Anita Arguello, who still lives in El Cajon. And I was able to talk to her a little bit about her family and how she grew up in San Ysidro with her grandfather owning a ranch in Baja. And this was very common. What happened is that this area was part of the Spanish Crown, the Portola expeditions, and then became part of Mexico. And that time when it was part of Mexico was fascinating. Native Americans were citizens. African Spaniards were citizens. The Californios owned these large ranchos, and they had something called disueños, which will appear. I was able to get a copy of it from the Bancroft Library, so it'll appear in the exhibit. And these disueños were land grants, and since the area was so vast, they didn't need to have exact boundaries. So in 1848, two things happened. It was the end of the Mexican-American War, the U.S.-Mexican War, the invasion of Mexico. We all talk about it differently. 1846 to 1848. And the end was a very, very dramatic period in the South Bay history because it ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And the fact is that the border, the U.S.-Mexican border, was surveyed and was shown to cut right through the Arguello Rancho. And that's when everything changed. And there was an Anglicization of the region, which I talk about. But the other thing that coincided with that treaty was the gold rush. And 80,000 Yankees just came to Northern California. And then they heard that Baja California, that the Jesuits had hidden a whole bunch of mines and had hidden gold in Baja. And so they rushed down to Baja as well. And what they did was that they were jealous of the Latinos, Mexicans, Sonorans were coming up. Also Chileans were coming up. They were jealous of them because Mexico, of course, had a large history of mining. And they knew how to mine much, much better than the Yankees. The Yankees didn't know what they were doing. So the Yankees, they were able to get into the positions of power, the legislature. They were able to get into becoming lawyers. And then they legislated things like the foreign miner tax to make sure that anyone who wasn't white couldn't mine or mined under difficult circumstances. To boot, the Yankees felt that it was very, very unfair that these Californios owned so much land, so they started squatting on the land. And they squatted on the Arguello property. The Arguello property said, "This is our land. Get off. You don't live here." And the squatter said, "Well, we're going to sue you now." And there was the 1851 California land law that said, well, you have to prove that these dueños are legitimate. And they would go through courts and have to pay the lawyers until they whittled down their land and whittled down all their money and holdings. And for the Arguellos, what you'll find in the book is that those court cases started in the 1850s and didn't end until 1953. With a fascinating court case with there's this woman Susana. She's an Arguello, and she went through court case after court case to say agua caliente belongs to me. And finally, she got the Mexican Supreme Court in 1953 to say, yes, that's true. And she then went up to Tijuana. She stayed at Agua Caliente, and she says, "This land is mine. I prove it. You guys you border barons have to get out." And in the middle of the night, she died of a heart attack.
Oh, my God. Was it a mysterious death or was it a legitimate heart attack?
Well, the San Diego Union Tribune, the reporter who wrote about it exactly as I told you. And so, of course, it brings up issues, but it was never investigated as anything except for a heart attack. So that was the problem with San Ysidro, the first book, is that I had gotten an anglicized version that forgot that all of these families and all of these Latinos had been here long before. And then I started to look up the census records because I talked in San Ysidro to so many people and they said, no, it was completely integrated. And then the city had created a historic context statement about San Ysidro and made it seem like mostly white people lived in San Ysidro until around the 1980s with the devaluation of the peso. Well, I looked at the census records from the 1880s, and census records tend to be inaccurate. They actually undercount the number of Latinos because most census takers were white, and they didn't, if someone didn't speak the language or they were racist or whatever, they say, oh yeah, well, you don't need to be part of the census. And so they would deliberately leave people off. And even so, the census records of what at the time at the border was called Monumentville had over 50% of people who were of some kind of Spanish-speaking descent. So they were there the entire time. And you look at San Ysidro, and again, all those census records show that the Latino presence was very, very high from the 1800s onwards. And so someone's not telling that story. And it is precisely because what happened after 1848, which after the break I'll talk about, is 3 waves of Yankee immigration that came in, and those 3 waves led to a rise of nativism and the Ku Klux Klan and all of these organizations that wanted to focus on quote-unquote immigration as a way to justify them coming in. They were migrants themselves. But it harkened back to Manifest Destiny. In 1848, in particular, a period of history that's not real talked about. Richard Griswold del Castillo is a historian, wrote Chicanos in San Diego. He says very clearly, after 1848, all the Yankees came in, and there was a deliberate policy of genocide against the Native Americans. They said, we are going to exterminate Native Americans. That was their policy. And their policy was to make sure that they were going to have a white California. And that caused the Californios and that whole Mexican period. The Native Americans lost their citizenship. African Spaniards lost their citizenship. Immediately, the Californios, including in San Diego, no longer had their political stature. They were losing their land. And by the 1880s, sure enough, it was mostly Anglo history, at least when you read the history. It was Anglo history, although we have little notes of people saying, Frank Kimball from National City saying, it's 1907 and it's very difficult to find a white man in these parts. And yet the books you read, the local history books, are all white people pictures, but it was difficult to find a white man in the South Bay in 1907.
We're going to come back in a minute because I'd like you to share a little bit more on people that are in the book and then talk about South Bay today, because South Bay is certainly an up-and-coming community with a lot of good things going on there. And yeah. I think we're seeing more of it in the paper, but we're not seeing as much as really is happening in that area.
Yes.
And okay, we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
On the internet, your business's reputation can be unjustly destroyed in an instant. Don't wait for that to happen. Building and marketing your 5-star reputation can increase your business by as much as 19%. Take control of your reputation and have the 5-star reputation you deserve with Reputation Marketing Solutions by DSI Development. Become the go-to company by visiting 5starrepmarketing.com. The number 5starrepmarketing.com.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, CEO and founder of VinVillage.com and the Wine and Dine Show on Vin Village Radio. Do you have a wine, event, product, or service to promote? Then contact VinVillage.com to reach thousands of wine lovers across the country. Vin Village connects like-minded wine enthusiasts with unique and exclusive wines, events, products, and services. To learn more, contact us on VinVillage.com. Vin Village is where wine lovers connect.
You've heard me talking about Progressive Medical Center. They have helped me feel my best. And Dr. Gully, tell us a little bit about integrative medicine. Why is that such a big deal at Progressive Medical Center, and how can that make me feel better?
Integrative medicine is just good medicine. It's combining the best of traditional medicine, nutritional medicine, natural medicine, and really helping the patient get to the root cause so they can take control of their health and really make an impact to improve not only their energy, their vitality, and just their overall outlook on their health and their life.
I procrastinated for a long time before I finally made an appointment. So why should someone not delay and go ahead and get set up and come see you guys?
Any journey begins with that first step, and that first step means making a decision to recognize that there's something wrong with you. Whether you have fatigue, inappropriate weight gain, not sleeping well, not concentrating, all of these issues, you can get to the root cause.
So many of us here at The Fish have gotten help from Progressive Medical Center. So why don't you find out more from them today? Go to progressivemedicalcenter.com.
This is your life. Live it well.
You take your smartphone almost everywhere you go. Now WSRadio.com can be there too. Search WS Radio in the Play Store for your Android devices or iTunes for Apple, and download the WS Radio application. WSRadio.com, on your phone and in your ear everywhere you go. Download the WS Radio application. Do it now. It's very easy. WSRadio.com.
Attention business owners. Does it feel like your business owns you? See if you qualify for a free 90-minute business coaching session to help you build a business, not a job. During this free 90-minute strategic consultation, one of our senior coaches will help you map out the best way to grow your company and get your life back. To learn more, go to MauiMasterminds.com/scale now. That's MauiMasterminds.com/scale now.
Talk to me.
Information, news, and entertainment on demand.
WSRadio.com.
Welcome, neighbors, to Vecinos with your host, Maria Garcia.
You're listening to WSRadio.com, the worldwide leader in Internet talk shows. And our guest today is Barbara Zaragoza, who's been talking about the lack of documented history in South Bay, which she is now working on. She's going to talk a little bit about a couple more families. And I personally want to thank you for writing books about a forgotten or overlooked, or whatever word you want to put there, group of people.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it's just been a privilege and an honor. And this is an oral history. So I had to go out and I had to meet a lot of people, and I had to gain the trust of a lot of people. And some of the things they shared, 3 of my interviewees have already passed away. And that's also very moving, is how to, honor them. And the contributions of people in the South Bay have been amazing. What I was talking about was the 3 waves of immigration and how that led to a lot of discrimination. And in 1848, certainly. And then the next wave of immigration was during the Depression in the 1930s, and that led to the repatriations of approximately, it's estimated, 1 million Mexican Americans back to Mexico. When you read these stories, it's just heartbreaking. And it did happen in mostly Los Angeles was targeted. And so I had a hard time getting families to talk about that. There was a lot of shame, and therefore a lot of not knowing whether their grandparents had been repatriated or not. They didn't want to talk about it. Unfortunately, you find this with victims, rape victims, concentration camp victims, also people who are repatriated, is that they feel a sense of shame or fear, and they don't want to speak out. And so I was very grateful to Rigo Reyes. And he's been here, I know, on your radio show too. Oh, lovely man. I was able to interview him and his mother, actually, who worked for many, many years at Ratner's. And she pressed 500 pants a day. Anyway, that's in the book too. But Rigo's father was about 8 years old, living in Los Angeles when he was repatriated with his family to Tijuana. And he was really brave enough to come forward and tell me that. And so that's in the exhibit and that's in the book. But very little is known. What we do know is that he was repatriated. He lived with his family in Tijuana. And then he found some opportunities going across the border, selling furniture from La Malinche. And he ended up coming back and working in San Ysidro in the South Bay and in San Diego, and immediately then got drafted into World War II. And then he was a POW for the Germans. And then ended up working for Solar Industries for many, many years. And Rigo grew up in San Ysidro. And so that was a very, very dramatic story. I think then the third wave of Yankee, white Anglo immigrants was during World War II. Because California became a major military industry. And so you saw a huge migration of millions and millions of people coming to, I have the numbers in the book, coming to California. And once again, there was this rise of nativism. And you had, during the 1950s, Operation Wetback. And so I was able to interview Albert Alvarado, who actually is one of the founders of the Sweetwater Authority, one of the water districts. And he's an interesting guy. His daughter is Mona Rios, who's currently a council member in National City. And he describes living in Old Town National City. And Old Town National City is, I have a chapter in the book about it. There's very, very little known. And part of the reason is because we don't have digitized archives at the National City Public Library yet, so we can't search much on it, and all of it had to be based on oral histories. That was the neighborhood that mainly Mexican Americans lived in, and most of the people who worked there were working in the tuna canneries. So I have a lot of interesting, I have a picture of and I even have an artifact of the tuna cannery uniform. But Albert Alvarado then described how Border Patrol would just go through that neighborhood and just ask for papers. And if you didn't have your papers on you, he said, you would just be deported into Tijuana. And this is very, very disturbing because people over and over again would describe how they were here for 8 generations. Their families had been here 8 generations, and Border Patrol would take them to the side and ask them for their paperwork, or their school children would call them wetbacks, which is a term that was created because of Mexicans going across the Rio Grande River and coming out of the river to the American side with their backs wet. So I think that these 3 waves of nativism and migration, where hundreds of thousands of people are coming into the California from the east, and therefore they're irate that a significantly lower number of people are coming from the south. That led to the Chicano movement. And the Chicano movement in the South Bay that began in the 1960s, it was recognized by Cesar Chavez and went all the way to the 1980s at least. Of course, the Chicano movement still exists, but it was very, very dynamic. The hub really was San Ysidro, and the hub was National City. Yeah, National City. And so, of course, one of the people that I went back to over and over and over again, and I was emailing actually for activist issues this week, is Herman Baca. And he's really the big figure, although I interviewed quite a number of Chicanos. You've interviewed some of them. Roger Cazares, who is also did wonderful things with the MAC program. Charlie Vasquez, who set up Casa Justicia in the 1970s. Justicia, gracias. And then Aguibareño. Herman, of course, is the one. We have the Herman Baca archives at the UCSD Special Archives Collection. So I'm able to use that archive collection to do a lot of research. And of course, as you probably know, when we're looking at my 50 people, 70 people, there's a big ambivalence towards the Chicano movement. Because people who came and who lived in the South Bay before the 1960s say, the Chicano movement, there was a big difference in families even.
And I think part of it was age difference, education difference. There's a variety of reasons for it.
Yeah, well, and a lot of pride. And there's also a difference between coming to this country and then living in this country. The experience of the Chicanos were, of course, how it started was that they didn't belong anywhere because they would be here and they'd be called a wetback, and then they'd go to Mexico and they'd be called a gringo. And they felt that they didn't belong in any place. And their parents didn't quite understand that experience necessarily. So the Chicano movement, though, as I started to look more and more, I realized the contributions they had made to our society are just immense. And Rigo will say, well, there was a lot of there was a lot of focus in the newspapers on what was going on in Alabama, but not so much on what was going on in this corner. And so I'm the one that's kind of dredging it up and looking for this, because Herman Baca has been a very, very big catalyst for this work, along with Pilar Rose, who wrote the Amazon critique of my first book, who gave me a lot of inspiration and really pushed me and said, you got to write this book, you got to write this book. Herman Baca also was writing a lot of emails as president of the CCR. He was saying, we need Latino history. Where is the Latino history of National City?
I'm sorry, our time's up. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
This is just scratching the surface of stories that must be told.
Yes.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
A podcast or radio show on WS Radio is a great way to create content marketing. Turn prospects into customers into raving fans. Contact Wade at WSRadio.com or call 866-WS-RADIO.
Kenya Dixon was crowned the #1 sales executive through hard work, deep thinking, and the revelation of Universal Talk Laws. He now wants to share these lessons with you. Universal Talk Laws are what you need to know and use in business and at home to have successful and effective conversations. Kenya Dixon shares his wisdom, action plans, and wealth. Each book comes with a chance to win $10,000. Find Universal Talk Laws at kenyadixon.com. On the internet, your business's reputation can be unjustly destroyed in an instant. Don't wait for that to happen. Building and marketing your 5-star reputation can increase your business by as much as 19%. Take control of your reputation and have the 5-star reputation you deserve with Reputation Marketing Solutions by DSI Development. Become the go-to company by visiting 5starrepmarketing.com. The number 5starrepmarketing.com.
Hi, Scale listener. This is David Finkel, co-host with Jeff Hoffman of Scale Your Business. I wanted to let you know that our newest book, Scale, was just released and to encourage you to get your copy. The book will give you 7 proven principles to grow your business and get your life back. If you've ever wanted to grow your business, but held yourself back from fear that it would take over your life, then we urge you to get your copy of Scale today. It'll give you a proven roadmap for rapidly growing your business while also gaining more personal freedom. Scale will help you work less by getting your business to produce more. Scale is for every entrepreneur who ever wondered if they really own their business or if their business owns them. Get your copy online or at your local bookseller. For more information, visit us online at scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com. That's scaleyourbusinesstoolkit.com.
Controversy and conversation to upset the status quo. A no-holds-barred exploration and obliteration of the limits of possibility. Join me, Steve Olsher, and my rambunctious crew on Reinvention Radio, where each week we scour the planet to bring you the world's foremost social, business, political, technology, and scientific disruptors who challenge the accepted and forge daring, cutting-edge paths. That's Reinvention Radio, where normal comes to die and mediocrity meets its final demise.
Hi, this is Rob Barnett, VinVillage.com, where wine lovers connect. Be sure to tune in weekly to Vin Village Radio for exclusive, in-depth interviews with the who's who in wine and food.